This Saturday, I'm publishing a children's book called Light, Bright Light. It's the first time that I've written and illustrated a children's book, so it's a new process. I'm excited about it. It's been a lot of fun to write and, create the book. But it also brings into my life a dimension of work and focus that creates some new problems. I'll explain. If you've never published a book before, I will tell you that you have no idea what it entails. I certainly did not, unless you work in that world. There's all sorts of little unexpected details. We pick up a book, we're used to it looking a certain way. We do not even realize how we're used to it looking. If you think about all the different pages in a book, from the front matter to the back, that's like, the copyright page and all those things. You would definitely notice if they're not there or if they're done in a weird way. But when it comes to actually starting to put it together yourself, it's quite a lot of little detail that makes it look right. And then there's also a book launch, right? There's writing to people like influencers and things like that, trying to give your book a chance out in the world. It's a lot to learn about if you haven't done it before. And as I start to learn about all of these little details, I end up on all these websites that start giving me this language like, let's see, from learning about writing to influencers, it'll say something like, this is a competitive and difficult environment or difficult world. We all know that these influencers don't have time for you, and you have to compete for their attention, and every year there's, 10 million books written. That's definitely not a real figure. And how are you going to make yours stand out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all sort of scarcity thinking, competition, all of that. And it's supposed to sort of motivate you to, be really intense and work hard. What that does, though, as you read those websites, multiple times a day, day in and day out for a period as you're learning to do all of these things, writing to influencers was just one example, it starts to put you in this mindset of constant sort of competition and a need to produce and improve and grow and go, 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 that kind of energy, which is not how I normally live. If you've watched any of my channel, you know that I'm focused on sort of the opposite pole of reality, the inverse focus, which is the being focus, not so much producing and changing things, so much as moving into acceptance, sort of allowing a fullness in this moment, and then allowing change to come from that space. It's a much sort of softer approach, you could say. And it's not what I sort of enter as soon as I start to try to learn about all of these details. So I see my world sort of warped for a period, right? I start to see myself in this context where, I have to be on all the time and I have to be competing and all of these kinds of things, which is really uncomfortable and starts to build up this inner tension of stress because, you're going and you're doing this thing, and if you do this thing wrong, then this will happen. And it's so important, I've noticed in my own process of sort of entering into this, that you step back regularly and just notice the quality of this moment at any given time, your qualitative experience. As you're working, as you're producing, which is the movement that our world is very much swept up in. We're living in a world that's very materially focused, that is therefore focused on improving quality of material standards, which has its place, that's great. But there's a total ignorance, although less so now, we're more aware now than we often are. But there's a general ignorance still around this inner dimension, around spirituality, around stillness, around doing nothing, around being. That being space is where sort of our wholeness and genuine fulfillment come from. And the doing space is where you're going to change and improve specific details, but they're not ultimately going to fulfill you or make you happy. Finally, they might bring you some happiness, but they're not going to bring you that final fulfillment. And when you start to get swept up in this movement that the world is so involved in, and it's pretty harsh and intense, it builds up a lot of tension. I think we just call it stress. We're all used to living with this stress. There's no reason for us to be living with this stress. It's really because of the way that we're collectively living. If you find that, you're stressed and living with this sort of energy of needing to constantly go, 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 take a step back. As you work in the world, it does pull you into its sort of energy, into its way of doing things, into its movement of activity and intensity. Take a step back. Just keep noticing how your environment and how that sort of collective paradigm of needing to constantly be on it pulls you into this. Notice how you might get swept up in it, and keep taking a step back, noticing sort of the being state, being here, meditating, letting go, noticing that things are already full, already complete in a way, that there's nothing that you have to achieve or change to be full, to be sort of abundant and whole right now. And then from that space of, wholeness, of abundance, okay, go back in and, create and, do what you need to do. Write to the influencers, publish your book, so to speak, whatever it is. But this whole video is just a reminder to step back when you find yourself getting swept up in so much activity that starts to generate that inner tension and stress. Step back, come back to being, notice this moment, notice that things are already complete. There's nothing that you need to achieve or change to reach that state, and that no achievement is really going to give you anything lasting or anything that you ultimately need, although it can be nice. So come back to sort of that absolute state of being, and then enjoy the activity on a relative level so it doesn't sweep you up into it so intensely.